Hey everyone, and welcome to the 8th episode in the tile scrolling series. Wow, this is going to be a massive series. Today we are going to be adding in the inventory UI, so that way you can actually see the inventory and it won't look like that weird list thing that looks bad. We'll be building upon all the stuff that we made last episode for the backend inventory and all that. Make sure you slap the like button and slap the subscribe button and leave a comment down below. But anyway, let's get into this tutorial. Okay, so I have one new sprite called inventory, and within it just has a bunch of numbers and then the items in the slots. So number 1 is just a 1, then number 2 is 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and then number 10 is 0. So these are just all the different numbers for the amount in that slot, and they kind of are just this like number with a bigger one in the background offset, and it gives it a cool shadow. Number 12 is empty, and this costume is just an empty slot, and it just has this gradient in the middle. And then number 13 is called null in all caps. It just has a question mark, and this is for if an item does not have a graphic for the slot, it'll just default to this one as a missing texture type thing. Now 14 is 1, and this is the stone. 15 is 2, which is dirt. 3 is grass. These actually match up with the IDs in the background. If we go into the background and look in the item meta, you can see that number 7 here is ladder, and if I go into the inventory and go to the slot named 7, it is the ladder. So it's very important that all these IDs match up everywhere, and that's how this system works. Number 10 is copper, and you can see that number 10 here in the item meta is copper ore. Okay, so now that we know what we need, we can go ahead and start coding this. So in the inventory, add a when I receive hide loading screen. Now we need to make a custom block called reset, and this will reset the inventory, as you may have guessed. And we can click run screen without fresh and then okay. Now what we want to do is run reset in the beginning here, hide, set the size to 100%, go to 0, 0, also known as the middle of the screen, then point in direction 90, and make a new variable called ID for the sprite only, and then click OK. Now what we want to do is set the ID to the sprite, because that's what this is. Alrighty, so you can see that when we start this game, you can't see anything, which is perfect because it hides itself in the beginning, and the ID is set to the sprite, which is perfect. Okay, so now we can actually make the custom blocks that will print out all the slots in the bottom of the screen. So scroll down to make a block and name this block create slots, like so, with a colon, spacing with a colon, and an input spacing. Oh wow, I can type so good, spacing. Okay, and run screen without refresh, and then click OK. So now in the very beginning, we can just create the slots in here, and we'll input 45 as the spacing. We need to make some variables for the X and Y, so make a for the sprite only variable, pause X, then another one for the sprite only called pause Y, like so. Now in the very beginning here, we want to set the pause X to, we need another variable called slot count, and this is how many slots we'll have on screen. Now in the reset loop, we can set the slot count to anything you want, but for now let's just set it to 5. Now we'll set the pause X to the slot count times the spacing, so that's the total amount of pixels or the current spacing and all that stuff, and then we'll take that times negative 0.5, but I'll divide it by 2 and make it negative. Then we'll subtract off spacing times 0.5, which is just half of spacing. So this will just find the correct position for the slots to start. And for the Y, you can just set the pause Y to anything you like. I'll do negative 150 because that's towards the bottom of the screen. Now to make this actually loop, we need to make a for the sprite only variable called I, and this will just be an iterator variable. So in the very beginning of this, we can set that to 1. Okay, so now we can go ahead and repeat the slot count, which is how many slots we want to make, change the pause Y, which is the position of the current slot we're iterating over, by the spacing. We want to make sure that we set the ID to slot, so that way it's not the sprite. Then we can go ahead and create a new clone of this slot with all this data attached to it and change the I by 1. Then we need to make a list that will keep track of the positions. So make a new list called inventory slot positions, like so, for all sprites, and click OK. Now in the very beginning, you can go ahead and delete all of that inventory slot positions, and then we want to add the pause X to the inventory slot position in the bottom. Then once we're done with all that, you can set the ID back to sprite. Just add a when I start as a clone, if else, and check if the ID is equal to the slot. So if this is a slot, then we'll show, and then we'll go to front. And this hopefully pop up a bunch of slots, but it won't be in the correct position. Yep, in the very middle of the screen, there's some slots. Okay, so that's interesting, but they're not in the correct position because we never actually use these variables. Okay, so we want to go ahead and make a custom block called position slot and click OK. And within it, all we want to do is go to the pause X and pause Y. Then we want to replace the item I of the inventory slots positions with the position X. And then we'll point injection 90. Okay, now if we go ahead and add a forever position slot inside of the when I start as a clone and start this game, hopefully we should see that there's a bunch of slots on the screen evenly spaced. Yes, look at this. There's some slots here, and for some reason they're really small, but they're perfectly spaced in the center of the screen, and it did all the math and stuff for us, so we don't have to do that, which is very nice because I'm lazy. Let's make a custom block called set costume slot like this, and then click OK. Now we'll set the costume slot right here. Now inside of here, as you may have guessed, we're going to set the costume, but we don't actually have the costume stuff, so for now let's just switch costume to 1, which is stone. Then we'll set the size to 250 so it gets big, and later on we'll actually make this switch to the right costume according to the inventory list. Now if we start this game, we should see that the slots are nice and big. Yep, look at that, they're perfectly in the middle of the screen. Now if we go ahead and test this and set the slot count to say like 7, and we start this game, you should see that there's more slots and they're perfectly spaced. So yep, look at that, we have 7 slots now. So it's really cool and expandable. Okay, so let's set that back to 5. And it also works with the spacing if you want to change that. Okay, so now we need to actually decode the stuff from the inventory to display on screen. So inside the item drop, we want to go ahead and find the decode amount, which is this right here, and then we want to pull that into the inventory. Okay, so now that we have this, let's go ahead and actually use it. So what we need to do is make each and every slot have a value that keeps track of how many items are in that slot. So go ahead and make a custom block called get slot amount, like so, and click OK. Now we want to run the get slot amount at the very beginning here. So for each slot it creates, it will check the amount in it. Then we'll decode amount from item I of inventory. Then we'll go ahead and make a variable called amount in slot like this and click OK. That's for the sprite only, by the way. And we'll set that amount in slot to the decoded amount, which is the amount in that current slot. So in the set costume, we'll just do switch costume to decoded value, which is the ID. Then we'll check if not costume name equals to the decoded value. So if it doesn't equal that, that means that the ID doesn't exist. So we'll switch costume to the null. That way it lets us know. You can see that these are all question marks. Okay, that's cool. So now we can make the letters that will pop up underneath these slots. So what we need to do to set that up is make a custom block called update slot count display, and now click OK. Now within this, all we need to do is do a position slot. Then we want to check if the amount in slot is greater than 0. So that means that we actually have an item in the slot. Then we'll go ahead and run position slot again. Now before we do that, let's make a custom block that'll create some text. So make a custom block called amount text with a colon, then amount with a colon, an input amount, then a label called letter width with a colon, and an input width, then a label size with a colon, and an input size. And make sure you check run without screen refresh and click OK. Now we want to run amount right here. Now for the amount, we'll set it to the amount in slot. Then the letter width is 19 and the size is 50. Okay, so this is just a basically simple version of the number counter I made. So let's go ahead and start by setting the ID to letter. Make a variable called letter number like this for the sprite only, and set the letter number to 1. Then we want to go ahead and set the size to the size. Then we want to repeat the length of amount, which is how many digits are in the text. Change the x by width times size divided by 100. That way it will move a little bit to the right. Make a for the sprite only variable called letter x like this, and set that variable to the x position. Then we want to switch costume to join the hash thingy with letter 1 of apple. Instead of 1, we want to do letter number, and instead of apple, we'll do amount. Then we want to create a clone of myself, so it prints out a new letter, and change the letter number by 1, so it iterates by 1. Then in the very beginning, we'll go ahead and do the update slot count display like this, and make sure you do the set costume slot and all that stuff below it. Then to make sure its ID is correct, we want to go ahead and set its ID back to slot because we set it to letter in this right here. Now let's set up the slot real quick. So just duplicate this if right here and check if the ID is equal to the letter. Then we want to show and change the Y by -4 so it moves down a little bit from where it's created. Then we want to forever go to front, change the Y by pause Y -8 once again so it goes down a little, then subtract off its Y position, then take all that times 0.2, which will smooth it out a bit, and put that in there. Then we want to set the X to the letter X like this. Okay, so now we need to make the inventory refresh each time we give ourselves an item. So add a new when I receive called refresh inventory like so, and check if else the ID equals to sprite. So if it's the sprite doing this, we'll just do nothing for now. Then in this side here, we'll do an if else and check if it's the slot. Now above that, we want to get the slot amount, so that way it finds out how much is in the slot. Then we want to check if not the decoded amount is equal to, we need to make a new variable called old amount in slot. Okay, so if it does not equal the old amount of slot. Now for the old amount in slot, what we want to do is in the very beginning here, set the old amount in slot to the amount. Then once we refresh, we'll check if its current decoded amount is not equal to its old one, which if it's not equal, we need to update the amount again. So we'll just do the update slot count display. Then we'll set the costume slot right underneath it. And last but not least, set the ID to slot so it resets everything. Then we want to duplicate this part right here and check if not all that and put that in this else. So this is the letter running it. So if the letter detects that it doesn't match, then we want to just delete this clone so that way it clears out the old stuff. Okay, so now in the very beginning here, let's go ahead and put a delete this clone at the very end and then broadcast refresh inventory like so. And if we check the inventory, it's all blank, which is good. And if we go ahead and mine up this grass block, say, you can see that we have one of a ID 2. And now if we go ahead and add a broadcast and wait refresh inventory and click on that, look at that, all of our work is paying off. It shows one dirt block here. If we mine another one, now we have 2, now we have 3, now we have 4. Okay, and we click refresh inventory. Look at that, it says 4 now. Okay, let's test this out. So let's get a log. We have 3 logs, then we have 2 grass. So it should have 3 of the logs and 2 of the grass here. Yes, look at this, 2 here, 3 there. Okay, so now we just need to make this refresh every time we get blocks. So inside the item drop right here on the add item to inventory at the very bottom, we want to broadcast refresh inventory. Then before the stop the script, we'll also refresh the inventory. Okay, so now if we test this out, fingers crossed, when we mine, it'll automatically add it to our inventory once we pick it up. So here's a grass. And yes, look at that, it pops in the inventory. Oh my gosh, this is actually so cool. You can see it always matches here. This says 3, 3, and the ID for grass is 3, and we have 3. Then 2 is dirt, and we have 6, and there's 6 here. Oh my gosh. Okay, so I actually missed a big part of this decode thing, and it's the reason that the thing is question marks instead. So if it does not contain this, then we set the decoded amount to 0, and then we want to set the decoded value, which is what it switches its costume to empty, and that's what will make it switch costume to the empty slot. Because as you can see, it's named empty. So you can copy and paste that in here. Okay, so now if I start this game in the very beginning, you can see that it is indeed, yep, empty here. And then we can mine stuff and it updates correctly. So now the inventory is looking how it should be. Oh, and in the beginning, I also forgot to show that we have the selector costume. You can see it's just a little like square with a arrow. Let's make the selector work now. So in the beginning, set the ID to selector like so, and then we want to create a clone of myself. Now we want to set the ID back to sprite like this, and then take out that and put that right above here. And we want to take out this delete this clone for now because it's not needed anymore. Now let's make a custom block for scrolling called scroll with a colon, then amount like so, and click an input amount, and then click OK. Now in the very beginning, let's scroll amount 0. Now let's make a variable called selected hotbar number for all sprites and change that selected hotbar number by the amount. Then we want to decode amount from item 1 of inventory and change this to the item selected hotbar number of inventory. Then we want to make a variable called selected item ID for all sprites and set that selected item ID to the decoded value. Where's that at? Decoded value like this. Now in the reset loop, set the selected hotbar number to 1, so that way it sets it to the very first slot. Okay, so now let's make the slot pop up correctly. So in this, when I start as a clone, in this else here, let me clean it up real quick and add an if in here and check if the ID is equal to the selector, because as you can see, that's what it is set to in the very beginning. Make sure you copy and paste that. Then we want to go to 0 and then pause Y like this. Show, and you can go ahead and take out all of that. Switch costume to the selector, so that way it looks like the selector. Set the size to 250%, so it's the correct size. Go to front and then go backwards 6 layers, so it's slightly behind the like numbers. Then we'll actually use the slot position list now, so we'll change the X by a times and then a minus, and put 0.5 in the times for the smoothness, and then put its current position in the right of the minus. Now we need to find its desired position, which is simply the item 1 of the inventory slot positions, and change this to the item selected hotbar number and put that in there. Okay, so now hopefully we should see a little selector pop up on the first slot. So yep, look at this, it smoothly goes to the first slot. Now if we get this custom block scroll amount and do 1 say, you can see it actually goes to the next slot. Okay, or if we change it by like -1, you can see it goes back a slot. Alrighty, that's working great. And wait, not 6 layers here, we want to do 5. Now let's make it to where you can scroll with your mouse. So here's a little trick you can do, is just do a when the space key is pressed and change this to up arrow. This is for scrolling up. Then this will allow you to use your actual keys, so make sure you check if not key up arrow press, that way it's only when you actually scroll. Then we want to make sure that it's the correct one, so if ID is equal to the sprite, so that way the only main thing can do this. Then we want to make sure we're not scrolling off of the amount of slots we have, so we want to check if the selected hotbar number equals to the slot count. Then we want to set the selected hotbar number to the slot count and scroll 0 amount. Otherwise we can just scroll amount 1 because we're moving 1 up to the right. Okay, so hopefully if we test this out, if we scroll up with our mouse wheel thingy, we can actually scroll to the end. So bum. Yes, look at this, we can scroll, and then once we get to the end, even though I'm scrolling, I don't know if you can hear that, I'm scrolling but it's not going. So now let's make it go down. So we can duplicate all of this and then do down arrow, and then make sure you do down arrow here, and let's do all the stuff for this. So let's check if the selected hotbar is equal to 1, then we'll select the selected hotbar to 1, otherwise we'll do -1. Okay, so hopefully we can scroll up and down now. So let's check this out. Moment of truth, we can scroll. Yes, look at this. Oh my gosh, we can actually scroll up and down through our hotbars. So the layering is a bit funky, so let's go ahead and go backwards 3 layers here maybe. You know, let's just take out the go backwards altogether. So let's see if this works now. Okay, this works a bit better. So now you can see that when we have our selector, it's always in front and we can mine up stuff and all that. Okay, now there is one little issue. If we dig dig down here, we can actually pick up stuff when our inventory is full. So see this coal block here? I can actually pick it up. So in this item drop, we have this uncompleted can pick up item function. So let's finish it up. Set the I to 1 here and repeat length of inventory. So it'll loop through all the items in the inventory. Then we want to actually decode the amount. So you can just duplicate this right here and decode amounts from the I of inventory. Then we want to check if item is equal to the decoded value, which is the ID of the decoded thingy. If it is, then we want to set the can pickup to true. Then we want to make a for sprite variable called inventory full, like so, and click OK. And we want to set that variable to false because the inventory is not full. Then we want to stop the script to make it not do anything else. Once we're done with all this, we can change the I by 1 to continue on the looping. Then at the very end here, if we are completely full, we can check if length of inventory is greater than backdrop number of inventory and change this to the slot count of inventory. So where is that at? Slot count. And we can't just do the slot count because that will make it to where it has to be bigger, so we'll take that -1. So if it's greater than or equal to, then we'll duplicate this and set the can pickup to false and the inventory full to true. Otherwise, we'll duplicate this again and we'll do just the same exact thing. Okay, so now we should be able to only pick up stuff if our inventory isn't full. You can see that right now our inventory is full, but if we mine up, say, this clay, it'll still let us pick it up because we have an existing slot that has clay in it. However, if we dig down to stone, it shouldn't let us pick up stone. You can see, yep, look at this, it doesn't even let us pick it up because our inventory is completely full. Thank you all so much for watching this episode on making the inventory UI. I hope you enjoyed it, but anyway, this has been Owen, and I am out.